is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me today is the editor-in-chief of Unwinnable.com. The only keep he's concerned about is the one around the clubhouse, and that's why we don't tell any of you where it is. Stu Horvath.
You know, the other day, I did that Ask Me Anything.
Right.
And one of the questions was, if I drop by the clubhouse, can I get a game in? And I was like, well, if you could get past, the fortifications and the ninjas and the swamp kraken, you can play. It would seem wrong to turn you away at that point.
I feel like that is the case. I mean, if you can get over that many hurdles, It was never ours to begin with.
Exactly.
So, Stu, what are we going to be talking about today?
How about a little bit of Keep on the Borderland?
Well, an all-time classic.
Indeed. So Lawrence Schick in Heroic Worlds speculated that B2, Keep on the Borderland, is, at that point, which was like 91, 92, the most printed scenario for a role-playing game ever.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they practically were giving it away with samples of Tide when they sent you stuff in the mail.
It was in the first two basic sets as your starter adventure, and it was also published separately, so you could buy it on its own if you didn't want the silly box. So yeah, there might be millions of these things in print, which is kind of crazy.
Which also explains that anytime I ever come across one, say at a convention or at a flea market or at a toy sale like they do in Wayne, I always find them in such pristine condition. I'll find Ravenloft, I'll find Against the Giants, I'll find Tomb of Horrors in terrible condition, always. However, it's never been opened, you'll find copies of Keep on the Borderlands.
And I think that the truer statement is you almost always find Keep on the Borderlands. It's always there. Whenever I'm looking at lots on eBay or whatever, it's oh, well, yeah, another copy of Keep on the Borderlands. Ugh.
Well, how many can you own, really? I mean, there's that instinct as a collector where you're like, oh, it's in such good condition, I should maybe pull it off the market and just keep it because maybe it's in better condition than the 4 other copies I have already.
Yeah.
But when does it end, man?
You know the Kinks album, Muswell Hillbillies?
Yeah.
I love that album.
Yeah.
Whenever I find it in a store, it's always for $2. And I always kind of want to buy it for the first time again. I never do, but the thought crosses my mind every time I see it. It's I'm just going to buy this and I'm going to give it to somebody. But I don't.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like that with Keep on the Borderlands. It's like that with any kind of role-playing thing I find in the wild. I'm just I need to buy this because that's what I
compulsion.
do. Yeah. It's a sickness. But yeah, so it came out originally in 1979. As I said, it was in both the original basic set as your introductory module. And I think it's sort of the perfect, for the time, perfect introduction to what Dungeons & Dragons is. You have a little bit of the wilderness stuff, just enough to make it feel like a place where you could travel to a couple different spots. There's the Bad Hermit and there's the keep that is your base of operations, and you have to go overland to the caves. And then you have this crazy cave complex. It looks scarier than it actually plays out because it's multiple discrete cave segments. So you can kind of tackle I'm going to take the left wing this time, and I'm not gonna have to worry about getting stuck in a huge vast place. It's sort of small and manageable.
Well, a lot of those old modules that came out around that time definitely had plenty of places where you could actually get lost in those cave structures. I mean, as a DM looking at the maps, you're just in some ways kind of overwhelmed because there's so many different routes they can go, and you want to tell a tight story and you want to run a good, concise game. And you know that your players are never going to do what you want them to do anyway. So when you have this labyrinth of caves, it's oh, geez, here we go again. But 2 routes, I think, is pretty cool.
Yeah. Compared to Glacial Rift, right? We played that.
Yes.
And think of the players. It's a lot to manage for the DM, but the players have to get through what is essentially a gigantic monster home and survive.
It's a cartography nightmare.
I was the cartographer for that game, so I could definitely appreciate that.
Sorry about that.
It's just a huge map, multiple levels, and it's just, so much. Keep on the Borderlands is nice. Everything's little slices. It's like a big pizza pie. You get one slice, you get another slice. And
there's a slice to everybody.
Yeah, eventually you'll eat the whole pie.
Yeah.
Because that's how we roll. But, you don't have to do it all at once. You could counter-cure some and have some for breakfast in the morning.
It's considered fitness if you can fit this whole pizza in your mouth. So, sure.
This one's going in places I didn't expect.
Expect the unexpected, Stu. You're friends with me.
Yeah. So the main draw of Keep on the Borderlands is the Caves of Chaos, right?
Of course.
And they're cool. I mean, I think that if you look at the maps for them, they're one of the most iconic early D&D maps. I think it's right up there with the Giants modules. Those maps are just so good. So you have basically a little home for every little goblinoid tribe. You got your hobgoblins, you got your orcs, you got your goblins, you got your bugbears. You got a little bit of the undead because there's like the Chaos Temple in there, and it's a little bit of everything, you know, but all sort of living in their own little parts of the caves, not really overlapping. So it kind of makes sense, you know. Bugbears don't have to worry about like skeleton warriors or whatever, you know.
It's kind of like the Warriors, where you're trying to make your way back to Coney Island, except you're making your way through a cave system, and there's different gangs of monsters.
Yeah, and all of this is like that really basic, hence the box, experience of what Dungeons & Dragons is. You know, you have your little base of operations, and you go across the hills, and you find the caves, and you go into part of the cave, and you kill some stuff, and you pull out some treasure, and you go home, and then you rinse and repeat. Is it a meaty, classic adventure in like the sense of like Ravenloft? No. But as like a beginning, sort of stamping out the template for what would come down the line for the next 30, 40 years, yeah, I think it's a pretty solid classic, you know?
Well, what levels is it for?
It's beginning, so like 1 through 4, 1 through 5.
See, I think an adventure like that is great for early levels because you are still kind of learning as a person who's playing the game in the real world, you know, how to play the game. As an adventurer, it's kind of how you need to start off, because I can't imagine as a first level adventurer how completely overwhelming it'd have to be. Just, I'm going to walk into this forest. We'll see what happens. Like the end, like the idea of you got a base of operations, you can guard the base, you can stock the base up with the treasure that you've found in the caves, you can lick your wounds here, you can defend it if need be. I think it's good to have that little home base that you can kind of, okay, I'm going out this far, then I'm coming back, and then I'm going back in, and then I'm coming back, and I've got some experience under my belt. I've got my confidence up as an adventurer, and now I'm ready to just walk into the forest, and we're going to see what shakes out.
Yeah. So this came in the basic box, which was expressly geared towards dungeon exploration. There were no rules for wilderness exploration at all. And in fact, the module has, you know, some loose rules so you could run that effectively. It was not within the auspices of the original box. And I think that's cool because it pushes you a little bit further. So like you read the rule book and it's like dungeon, 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 dungeon. And then you get this module and it's like, but you're outside. How do I deal with that? But it's just like that gentle slope of difficulty of like, oh, well, I have now one more thing that I have to work with. It's hard for us to sometimes think as beginners now.
Of course.
You know, so I think it's really cool. One thing that kind of blows my mind is that this is a basic Dungeons & Dragons module, period. I feel like it's regularly ranked as one of like the best of all time D&D modules, but it's not Advanced Dungeons & Dragons.
Really?
Yeah, no, it's in the basic set. That's a different set of rules from OD&D.
Yeah, I know. For me, though, I've had it appear so often that I've just always accepted it as Advanced Dungeons & Dragons.
Well, even more interesting, when we had the playtest packet for 5e, it was the Caves of Chaos.
Right.
I just think it's such an interesting thing because like there's the OSR movement that really likes the Beck-Me stuff and OD&D, the original white box, and feels like that's like where it's at. I think that it's interesting that Borderlands has this outsized reputation, isn't in the lineage of the editions, you know, the numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, but then 5 comes along and it's just like, no, when we playtest this, we're going to go to a basic adventure. It's an odd choice.
It is an odd choice. However, I think that being that we exist within 5th edition currently, I look at what they do as far as going back and pulling the best of every edition. It's kind of like their own version of Crisis on Infinite Earths, where it's like, well, this is going to survive this edition, this is going to survive that edition, and we're going to make it playable for everyone across the board as 5e. And that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Because I think that there is, especially thinking of a previous episode that we did on Star Wars, where you had all this stuff that happened before the new trilogy that just got wiped away. What 5th edition is doing, which I think is nice, is that they are cherry-picking things that are relevant and things that need to still exist. And for people who maybe would not have experienced that coming in as a new gamer, they're able to, oh, wow, so this is what Elemental Evil should have been like. So this is what the Jungles of Chult are like. So it's kind of like a blending of all the worlds.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I don't think that it's a necessarily bad thing. I just think that it's an odd thing, especially because in my mind, like it was one of those things that I had to remind myself to bring up today. I'd never really made a distinction between the basic stuff and the numbered editions, but there is a difference. And we've played both.
Absolutely.
Like, they're different systems. And the original printings actually had a little notation that it was like, with minor modifications, can be played with Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. And then they took that out.
Right.
So, because they're really not that minor. I think it is a little bit difficult to bring it over to AD&D.
Oh, it's a bit of a wider berth than they acknowledge.
Yeah.
True, yeah.
But I think you're right. I think that it's cool that they went that route with 5e using this for the playtest. I also want to bring up sort of a side note, or a thing that I think is interesting anyway. This came out in 1979, and over at the offices of Chaosium, my favorites,
Your favorites.
they released for RuneQuest Snakepipe Hollow, which is one of the classic RuneQuest scenarios, which also involves you traveling overland to a cave system infested by chaos.
What?
I mean, they were based in San Francisco. You know, TSR was in Lake Geneva. There was probably not that much overlap. I think that they were just thinking, you know, it's the Wild West. A lot of stuff hasn't been defined, and people were just like, cave systems at the same time. It happens all the time. Simultaneous invention, right, in science.
Hey, man, a lot of hit songs been written with G, C, and D.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah,
So it's fine.
But I think that it is super interesting because we talk a lot about Gary Gygax's theory of dungeon design and his idea of ecologies, right? The idea that everything in a dungeon should like kind of make a sort of ecological sense. It's weird because it's not science ecology, it's fantasy ecology. So Glacial Rift is just a whole bunch of cold-based monsters, right?
Right.
Like, why are those white dragons there?
Because funsies.
Yeah.
And white implies like icy and cold. I don't know.
No,
I'm reaching.
They're there, and it like makes sense on like the thematic aesthetic. But, like, I just don't get why the frost giants are hanging out with white dragons. Like, they should probably at odds.
Yeah, diametrically opposed.
They're both extremely greedy. And, I mean, I guess there's some sort of symbiotic relationship, but I don't know.
Also, quick little sidebar, I don't think that dragons, by and large, should be getting along with anybody.
Well, yeah, there's that. Like, they're extremely greedy and territorial, and, like, unless, like, you're dealing with archmages that have, like, a big world-spanning scheme, like, yeah, they probably live in their cave and eat everything that comes near them.
Yeah, but even if they're enslaved, first chance they get, what are they going to munch on?
Yeah, exactly.
Evil wizards.
So, like, that's sort of the flaw in the Gygaxian evolution, especially at this point. There are things in the Caves of Chaos and Keep on the Borderlands that feel of a kind with that. Like, it doesn't really make sense. Like, it makes sense on one level that all these goblinoids are, like, hanging out, living next door to each other, but they all kind of hate each other, and there would be a consolidation of power. You know, and they wouldn't really be just like friendly neighbors.
So you're saying out by the keep itself, there would be a Cyrus trying to get all the goblinoids together from the different goblinoid gangs because there are more goblins out there than there are adventurers. Can you dig it?
Measly piece of anyway, I'm not going to do. Nobody's paying to hear me do a Cyrus impersonation. So there's just odd things about it, and like it's so early that like you kind of overlook it. And if you compare it to later D&D stuff, because D&D evolved, it does look clunky and flat. Snakepipe Hollow, on the other hand, is super interesting because that flatness isn't there. There's a whole lot of depth. And yes, you know, I love Chaosium, I love RuneQuest, blah, 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 blah. But if you compare these two things that are super similar, came out at the same time, and you put them right next to each other and you read them at the same time, there's so much more going on in Snakepipe Hollow that touches on actual ideas of like an ecology. Like there's a reason why the entire cave complex is infested with chaos the way it is. And by going through it, you learn stuff about the events that happen there and that figure into the larger world. I'm not saying that one is better than the other, kind of. But what I am saying is that you can see where the evolution was going to eventually go. D&D eventually catches up to Snakepipe Hollow, but Snakepipe Hollow was also a really important template being stamped out at the same time. I just think that's super fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, both companies kind of working on a similar idea, albeit without any kind of communication between the two. I look at it in the same way that I look at, say, DC Comics and Marvel Comics.
Yeah.
Lots of similarities between the two back in the day during the origins of everything. Lots of, we're just going to throw a bunch of shit at the wall and see what sticks, and then not worry about kind of refining it or even so much as kind of streamlining it until you go even 2 decades away from when it started.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at Batman. Batman was like shooting people with a gun in the first, like, I don't know, 13, 14 episodes.
Dropping guys in the vats of acid.
Yeah, Superman was like killing people. Like before they were like, oh man, maybe we shouldn't.
Yeah.
Maybe we should do this. Like, I think that's cool. I think that especially at this point in the game, we've been fortunate enough to see the evolution of storytelling, be it visually, be it audibly, be it with technology and video games, be it with tabletop board games and actual board games themselves. We've seen the evolution of that. We've seen things change. We've seen things grow. And I wonder what it's going to be like, because now everything's kind of been done. You know, now we're at a point where I feel like it's going to be easily another 20 years before there's going to be like a next big, oh crap, we need to do this.
Yeah.
And when that happens, everything needs to be done behind the scenes and figured out before people get to see it in the public. Like, I look back when they're writing modules like this, I'm sure they play tested it to a certain point, but you could actually see the growing pains. I don't know that we're ever going to experience another time where in real time we actually get to see the growing pains of a company.
Yeah, this is one of the things I think is super fascinating about the early days of tabletop role-playing, is because you have that moment where it didn't exist and then it does exist. And then there's just one of it. There's only like a handful of modules out at this point.
Yeah.
Like 5 or 6 for D&D and, you know, a handful for RuneQuest. Like, there's just not that much material. So, like, you can see so easily. Like, it's not like the history of books where there's so many books. You know, like, where was the first one? What was the third one? You could actually chart and see, like, oh, well, this was the third module. This is how it's developing, and see the evolution play out. And you're right. I don't think that you could do that anymore. You could, but I think that your audience is just going to naturally expect a more polished thing right out of the gate.
Finished product right out the gate.
Yeah, and this is true of everything. Compare Mandalorian and Watchmen, right?
Okay.
Mandalorian, that first episode is a pilot, and it feels like a pilot, and it has pilot-y things in it. There's like a whole bunch of stuff, and it's kind of like figuring stuff out as it's going. And then the second episode, it hits its stride, and it's like, okay, I get it. And they've knocked all that rust off. But you look at Watchmen, episode 1, it's the thing.
Yeah.
It's like sitting down for a movie. There's no runway. For me, that's a sticking point with The Mandalorian. I'm just like, they're figuring that out right in front of me, you know?
Of course.
It's still going on, is what I'm saying.
And it feels good. I think that there's a certain degree of good vibes that I get from watching something unfold and watching something appear and grow. I would say even as recent as 10 years ago, you could be a band or a creator and be like, hey, this is what I'm doing. And then over the course of years, you evolve into something else.
Yeah.
Where now, because the market is so much larger, because so many more people have access and the ability to go out and create whatever product they want to create, you need to be so on right at jump and have your image system figured out, have your Bible figured out, your world figured out, everything about the product that you have figured out and nailed down, and you get one shot.
Yeah.
We are able to look back as historians and check out all these old books and check out all these old modules and see, okay, they were definitely kind of figuring stuff out. We're kind of at a very interesting point in time where when people look back at this time and what's created around now, it's like, well, that was done.
Yeah.
And that's the final answer on it.
I like the idea of having something perfect, and it comes to me and it's new and it's wonderful and I enjoy it. But I think there's a value in seeing stuff hammered out in real time, like the way RPGs were in the early days. And I think that audiences expect the finished product perfectly polished, but I think that as a culture, we're better served by seeing things grow and evolve over time in front of us. When you hide process, when you hide the creative pitfalls that you run into, it changes your expectations, and like you wind up with less cool stuff because a lot of stuff happens by accident.
I 100% agree. And this is something that I have a hard time reconciling with myself because I grew up in the punk rock scene. And I grew up where necessity is always the mother of invention, and we're going to put some stuff out there before maybe it's ready to go out because we need to see how people react to it. We need to really feel it and have people experience it and see how they feel it. Versus now as a content creator where I'm like, oh shit, like the audience is a very finite number of people. There's plenty of other options for them to listen to. I need to blow the doors off from the minute I open.
Yeah. And that's not conducive to coolness, right?
Right.
Like, it's a lot of pressure you got to manage.
It is a lot of pressure.
And I feel like we're still on topic here because We have not, dear listener, gone crazy and started just talking about creativity because it all ties in.
It does all tie in because we do get to see the evolution of these modules, and we get to see a blueprint of where everything came from, like the different goblinoid tribes and how they are going to interact with each other. And at a very small level, like a very ground level of it, we can actually see kind of the direction that they're moving towards when they start to unify everything.
Each little piece that comes out in these early days pushes it on a course. Like there's infinite possibilities, and every release, it collapses those branches down so that there's less and less possibilities. And we start seeing how what we have now was inevitable. It's not quite inevitable at this point in 79, but like in another year or two, it starts to solidify, and it's just like on a collision course with the now.
100%.
I think that with this, we have such an interesting opportunity to look back and understand that and pick that apart and see what it means. Unlike anything else, even video games, which kind of came about at the same time, a lot of that stuff is hidden from us. And stuff like Keep on the Borderlands, it's there. It's right there. We could play it.
There are millions of copies of it still in rotation in the world.
And it was just reprinted by Goodman Games, their super maximum special edition of Into the Borderlands.
Their definitive edition is amazing. If you have not heard about it, dear listener, definitely check out Goodman Games. They are redoing and in some ways reimagining classic modules where you will get a thick, like how many pages is Keep on the Borderlands?
26.
Okay, so Goodman Games will put out a book that is hundreds of pages where they will reprint Keep on the Borderlands as was. They will update it for current edition, which is 5th edition, and then you get a bunch of like extra stuff in there. The print's better, they expand the artwork. Everything is absolutely amazing, and it looks so good on your bookshelf. So they've done Keep on the Borderlands, they've done Isles of Dread, they've done Expedition to Barrier Peaks, and they're amazing. And it's great for the person who's into the OSR, and it's great for the person who is psyched on 5th edition and is maybe trying to play it with people who've never played D&D before, and you want them to experience the classics. Now, speaking of artwork, Stu, who did the art in Keep on the Borderlands?
That's one of the cool things about early D&D products is you get a little bit of everybody. There's some Jim Roslof, there's Errol Otus, Bill Willingham's in there, Diesel LaForce. Everybody's contributing. It's like the whole gaggle of D&D artists at that time were just like, well, we got a module to put out. I got page 10.
It's like an appetizer sampler of artists.
Yeah. Errol Otus on the back.
It's one of my favorite castle paintings of all time.
It's so serene,
It
considering
is.
what's going on.
Oh, in the sky. It's like
Yeah.
the golden hour before the real bad deeds go down.
And then Jim Roslof does the front cover art, which I've always loved because I love hobgoblins, and those appear to be hobgoblins. And also it's purple, which I think is just like, oh.
Yeah. So powerful. Such a power color.
It's like a ugly power color. Like it really...
I don't know, man. Prince made it look pretty good.
Oh, I know. Yeah, but like there's no paisley on this, you know?
That's true.
It's...
You're not wrong.
It's a very loud color, but I think it works. I think it's just a classic through and through. I'm not sure. Like the text is yellow on purple, which is like, okay, that's like high contrast. I get that. But then like the little For Dungeons and Dragons basic set banner on the side is orange.
Yeah.
Which is a hard thing to look at.
That's a hard left. I look at those old covers, though, and I think of our friend Sean Dillon, who is an amazing tattoo artist. And what he tells you when you're looking to get a tattoo and you're asking, well, how big should it be? And he just looks at you and he says, bold will hold. Meaning the line work he does is going to stay in because you're going to go bold with it. Now, when you look at a cover like this, I could see it on the shelf in a store, and among all the other artwork, the first thing I'm going to see is that color, and I'm like, what is this purple majesty that I say? And I'm going to saunter on over.
That's true. It's very true. I actually just was writing up posts about Star Frontiers, and the original box is a very nice looking blue with a very nice Larry Elmore painting on it. And then the second edition is like screaming magenta.
Yeah.
Like it hurts my eyes to look at, but boy, if you saw it on a shelf, it would leap right out and jump down your throat.
I can't look away. Oh, man. So, Stu, do you have any final thoughts on Keep on the Borderlands?
Yes, I do. I think it is an excellent and easily obtainable bit of Dungeons & Dragons history that you should check out. If you can't score a cheap vintage copy, you could get the Into the Borderlands thing and get a taste for what it was like in the early days.
I totally agree. And folks, if you can't find it on eBay, just skulk around your local toy show. Any person who's got D&D toys or modules for sale, I bet they got a copy lying around.
Because there's millions of them.
Stu, where can the people find you?
They can find me on Instagram at VintageRPG, where I post about vintage RPG stuff every day.
Cool. You could find me on the Twitter at Hambreaker. I tweet about professional wrestling. I tweet about cute animals. I tweet about Dungeons and Dragons. You can also follow my day-to-day adventures in podcasting and life over on Instagram at John Hambone McGuire. If you love the podcast, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to it. When you do that, you help other listeners to find us. And if you really love the podcast, think about heading over to our Patreon, patreon.com/vintagerpg. Stu writes some amazing essays. I make unboxing videos. We've got early release episodes and more. So definitely check that out. And for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Degger West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.